So first of all, I slightly regret trying to cover too much in this, so apologies for the whistle-stop tour. And also, I just feel incredibly lucky and honoured and a little bit nervous to be here, so So this is really about the art and activist practice that I covered in my PhD, and really key to the Northern Irish abortion rights movement. The cover title here is some of the images from the last project I did as part of the PhD, and the images on this side are when they were wheat pasted across the walls of the city of Belfast on the night that we got the historic decriminalisation of abortion bill. Let me see this. Oh yeah. So the power of photography can be best grasped if photography is understood not merely as a technology of visual representation, but as a constitutive type of visible action within the social world. So these other images of sort of landscapes are a project that I did as part of my master's, which photographed women's journeys from Ireland over to England, because that was the only access for a long time to access abortion. So you'll see some of those as well. As an active member of the reproductive resistance, my art practice sprung from within activism and research around abortion. So I was very keenly aware of the need for affected and effective people's perspectives. Patriarchal power has poisoned the long history of global abortion access. Its violent control exacerbates marginalities like gender, class, race, sexual and gender identity, disability, and more, and it touches every strata of society. Yet to even say the word abortion in public in Northern Ireland meant breaking taboos when I began in 2010. So these images are from some of the activist actions that I've been part of. Pollock asks feminist artists for contextualization. Our shared histories will be the self-affirming stories we tell ourselves about resistance, which should be answerable to a sense of the real processes of lived and suffered histories. Thus, to enter critically into the problem of narrative, representation, history, and the politics of meaning, we shall need self-awareness of who we are when we tell a story, what its effects will be, what's excluded, and how contingent it will be, however diligent we are. So this is why I introduce Alliance for Choice. This was our Vagina Mary protest on one side, to protest a prayer for the unborn that was about to happen in Belfast. And on the other side is Ashley, who was one of our activist members who went to the Supreme Court. We were set up in 1996 and remain a powerful voice for reproductive justice in Northern Ireland. As one of the current co-conveners, we continue to highlight discrimination, raise awareness, and provide spaces for peer-to-peer learning. We help people safely self-manage their own abortions and challenge the limiting status quo through lobbying and direct action. Our co-created cultural projects were key to a broad struggle towards decriminalisation, and we continue placing abortion experiences in the public narrative, co-producing participatory projects highlighting state abandonment, demonstrating stigma as a socially produced phenomenon that impacts abortion seekers and their understanding of cultural worth. Although the laws in the north of Ireland were some of the worst in Europe, the taboos are globally understood because they test the construction of gender roles that have been resistant to change for centuries. It encapsulates the fear of a sexually active, independent woman that features in dominant anxieties in our cultural discourse and coursed through the veins of Western culture since the witch trials. Alongside this cultural anxiety is the historical lacuna of abortion seekers' own stories via art, storytelling, popular culture, and research. This effective censure enabled outrageous stereotypes and harmful stigmas. This is despite abortion being so common that 1 in 3 women has at least one abortion in her lifetime. Stigma begets stigma without a counter-narrative that can grow an empathetic space for nuance and compassion, which in turn can grow outrage to action. So now we're going to go into why I use Azalea to frame my practice. Azalea's usefulness in understanding the approaches of Alliance for Choice dovetails with their enthusiastic embrace of the tools of cultural production to address state failings and a lack of citizenship. Both acknowledge spectatorship now has the sophistication of visual literacy emerging from our increasingly photo-saturated world. Within the social space of photography, the point of departure for our mutual relations cannot be empathy or mercy. It must be a covenant for the rehabilitation of their citizenship in the political sphere within which we are all ruled. As citizenry of photography's makers, subjects, and readers, we all share an ethical responsibility to honour others in that web of relations. Azalea's framework positions the sexual abandonment of reproductive bodies in need of restitution through her civil contract of photography. Like a gambin, Azalea offers potentialities of resistance. Even under state surveillance, I know only too well how political organisers need glimmers of hope to galvanise. There are limits to the power of the visual, but when employed within a wider social movement, it encapsulates Azalea's assertions. Whilst Azalea makes useful reframings of the power relations inherent in how photographs are made, there are no doubt limits to her readings. However, her hopeful confidence in revolutionary moments where the shared language of photography grants us permission to change the violence to connection embodies this novel civil contract. Addressing Pollock's demand for the legible and visible while servicing the less prosaic signifying systems of unconscious with its multiple displacements, substitutions and playfulness, Azalea frames vulnerable citizens like Butler's shared vulnerabilities, contending that gradually the shift of focus of the feminist project has been from the realm of political rights to the realm of life. Whereas the first wave of their struggle was directed against their exclusion from the political sphere, the second may be defined as a struggle against their sexual abandonment. As Bell Hooks said, "The gaze has always been political in my life. Yet even in so-called emancipated democracies, there are still those excluded from the political sphere: refugee and asylum-seeking people, prisoners, those detained under the Mental Health Act, and those purposely disenfranchised by the abandonment of the state." Let us focus, however, on the reason reproductive and sexualized bodies globally need this alternative form of citizenship. Although Azalea's conception of photos as a mode of citizenship doesn't compensate directly for the lack of rights, it proffers a possibility of rights. It allows a civil imagination of recognition and a glimmer of repair and accountability in another plane of humanity. Her citizenship through photography suggests we have an obligation to others to struggle against injuries inflicted on those who are governed along with us. The citizen has a duty to employ that skill the day she encounters photographs of those injuries, to employ it in order to negotiate the manner in which she is ruled. So rather than a passive, empathetic gaze, Azalea is bestowing a framework that echoes an internationalist feminism which universalizes a global injury against our reproductive bodies, agency, and political power, so invoking our global rights and responsibilities. So this project, when they put their hand out like scales, was made in 2010 when I returned to Belfast after living in London for a long time. The activist group Alliance for Choice were demoralised as the London Westminster government Labour Party had done a deal with the Christian fundamentalist DUP in Northern Ireland, which ensured that the English Abortion Act was never extended to Northern Ireland, which resulted in thousands of these journeys every year. Abortion Support Network had just set up in London following the financial crash that meant many more needed help funding abortion journeys from here to England. Once I'd put in many of my own hours of activist work, both groups granted me access, a privilege which compelled me to deal sensitively with abortion decision-making, photographing the journeys to England from Ireland and grappling with the outside forces that frustrated access. The essence of my practice as part of my role as an abortion activist aims to construct a new common understanding of what abortion is, means, does, and impacts. Paczewski understood this clearly when she lamented that feminists were ceding the visual terrain to the powerful images of the anti-abortion lobby, who capitalise on tropes of motherhood and take advantage of the ultrasound image and the vernacular of the family photo album's performative femininities to remind us that abortion is breaching our reproductive social contract. Chan's discussion on abortion work draws out the problematisation of silence's strength, of duty, and being broken to call attention to the difficulties that it provokes. Historically, art in Ireland plays with themes of secrecy, silence, and solace. The core of this project would exemplify invisibility versus visibility, acknowledgement without denouement, and the kindness of strangers. She said, "The absences in this work connotes diverse meanings. As well as women who've travelled, they suggest the women with unwanted pregnancies who are prevented from doing so, and recognition of the agency in all of the artists concerned, not to reduce women to an image of victimhood. They also invite us to come to voice as part of an ongoing challenge to stigma." Of course, I wasn't always the only artist, even if it felt like it sometimes, covering abortion. There were loads who came to be part of the movement in Ireland, including Jessie Jones and Sarah Brown, Siobhan Clancy, the Homework Collective, Amanda Coogan, and the Artist Campaign to Repeal the 8, and of course, my own Array Collective. We tend to forget that work in the art community is also effective and reaches people who will reach many others. Artists alone can't change the world, but then neither can anyone else alone. Lepard describes the goal of activist artists as a theoretical and practical social engagement and action, using fine art, multimedia, and embracing an expansive approach rather than a finessing one. My activist projects strive towards an empathetic participation and collaboration, and Azoulay's reconstitution of the marginalised, as well as Butler's power of performative assembly and shared vulnerability. My assertion is that the most successful projects generated empathy that then provoked people to further dialogical space in their homes, workplaces, communities, and online spaces. Many of the participants in these projects went on to become incredible activists, or were already. A demand for livable lives lives through socially engaged photography and removes the heavy jacket of self-censure. I had a show in Dublin in 2013, and there were accompanying events organised by Siobhan, another artist in that picture. Here she's at a speak out where people who've had abortions are invited to tell their stories. And to create a contemplative space that echo people's lived experiences, I was invited to have my prints, I don't know if you can see there, in the background. In 2014, an expanded version of the work using collages from Women on Web, who are an NGO supplying abortion pills, was then exhibited in Belfast. I invited members of Alliance for Choice to join me in the tradition of feminist collectives, from the Hackney Flashers to the Guerrilla Girls. So we used the art space to convene activist meetings, workshops, public lectures, and I even had some of my own protesters who warned me of my descent to hell and the blood on my hands, like all good witches. The work was also shown in Berlin's OK Raum Gallery, which helped us forge relationships with, believe it or not, a Berlin, Ireland abortion solidarity movement, which generated loads of regular donations. This next work is called An Appropriate Hobby, and my previous years of active involvement granted me access to hundreds of advocates. This is just a small selection over 5 years. I got them to send me images of their activism, which I collaged symmetrically onto their portraits in passport-sized butterflies. As a reminder of the surveillance of feminists since the advent of photography, 1861 was the invention of the colour photograph, and it was also the year that the British introduced the Offences Against the Person Act, which outlawed homosexuality and abortion. These passport-sized butterflies reminded us of the surveillance of feminists since the advent of photography, abortion travel, taxonomies of control, but also the power of assembly and communal action. Their last outing was as head-size versions on the streets of Belfast, wheat-pasted with the help of Array Collective on the historic day that abortion was criminalised for women and activists in 2019. Their collective movement onto the streets was symbolic of our move to a new and hopeful future. Kester asserts that our connected knowledge is grounded in a capacity to identify with other people. This empathy means we cannot learn simply to suppress self-interest through identification or through an irresistible compulsion of logical argument, but to redefine the social relations that make up our ideas of self, to both know and feel our connectedness with others. In addition, Lepard's focus on modes of collective working asserts a cooperative consciousness. As she says of feminist social practice, 3 models are public or group ritual, consciousness raising, cooperative, collaborative, collective, or anonymous art making. Emma Crowley said of the appropriate hobby work, it's important to see these avatars and campaign tiles, I'll go back to them, not simply as representations of the collective, but to grasp them in their fullness of detail as indices of the labour power behind the struggle for reproductive justice. They demonstrate a critical role of socially engaged art nationally and internationally as a signifier of digital activist communities and a campaign tool in the continuing movements for abortion rights and access. So as a member of the 11-strong Array Collective, we try and respond to socio-political issues that directly impact our members and communities. We often invent characters as vessels for a reconstitution of complicated but emancipated subjects. Our Morrigan, it's an ancient Irish character, like a crone character, was imagined as a virgin youth, a pregnant woman, and an old crone, and like her mythological inspiration, she shape-shifted from one to another with increasingly animalistic features, finally dragging herself to the walls of Westminster buildings, weeping and begging for recognition of equitable abortion rights at the feet of an English suffragette. Invitation to engage with the effects of colonialism in this performance asked an English attendee at our exhibition to ignore the ignorance towards Northern Ireland and its complexities. Not only did it request empathy, but required an acknowledgement of British state abandonment and the othering of Northern Ireland and its people, even as they travel every day to access rights, jobs, and healthcare. However, the question for Array has remained until recently if anyone outside of Northern Ireland understood the nuances of our intentions. But perhaps the invitation for the work to be nominated for the Turner Prize evoked the right kind of magic and stirred even a fraction of the British consciousness. Only time will tell. So what does photography gain as a site of protest beyond empathy? Azalea proposes that photography has become the basis of a new civil contract that goes beyond state borders or corporations. It calibrates a triadic relationship of gazes and utilises a complex understanding of the world beyond the photograph, contextualising its existence. Her assertion is that there's always a traffic of meaning, like Sakula, and a multi-layered unfixedness, because beyond the person in the image making and taking and the people portrayed, there is the audience who view the image and recontextualize and reimagine. No matter how we see an image, digitally, on paper, on metal, they are not only mere objects, but a complex negotiation of multiple gazes colliding. It's a dialogue towards a generation of rights embodied in our social relation of taking and making photographs, and a broad conceptual mode of claiming rights, which I've found useful in many ways, even when it didn't deliver actualized rights alone. As photographs made and read by everyone, they are a global language of the people. Context is part of being a citizen of the community of photography as we use its vernacular and learn through action. This enables us to disregard differentiation between victims, perpetrators, spectators, and photographed. Photographers and sharers instead understand how fast we can find ourselves thrown from one position to the other. Azalea asks us to believe that the revolutionary moment photographed allows ourselves to imagine transforming the violence that sets us against each other onto a different form of civil contract. She claims every photo is made and seen plurally, most often out of the control of the original protagonists. Photography is knowing in its performative wish to be seen, in the acceptance of the person who knows they are being photographed. When separated from nationality or any other essentialist conception of a group, citizenship comes to resemble the photograph relation. Okay, thank you.